began my life first in the Polytechnic, teaching travel and tourism, so that's where I met you. Moved on to 1977 to Sophia College and had 35 years over there, and the last 11 odd years as principal. I thought then I deserved a retirement, but sisters never retire, and so my management moved me to the Polytechnic. And there I am director, and I have a few students of recent times. Not that I have taught them because they're students of design, but I'm over there. But that is one life. Those who know me as administrator, teacher, know me as that. Except when I've taken students on archaeological digs. And those who know me as a researcher know me as that. And this is a site where I've been working I went there first in 1983, began work in 1985. Now you wonder that whether I'm still from 1985 till today working at the site? No. From 1985 till 2001, I went every year and I've spent time over there working at Hampi and really making wonderful discoveries, having a very great time, interacted with some wonderful scholars, and made many discoveries. I'm not going to show you all those discoveries. I cannot do it in 45 minutes. That will need many lectures. But since 2001, I'm working on the larger area of the Vijayanagara Empire and its successor states. And working on the larger area of the empire throws light on what has happened at Hampi, and what happened in Hampi throws light to understand things that I see all over the empire. You might ask, do you think there's anything more to understand or to discover? I'm sure there will be, and there is. Just a month ago, I was at CSMVS and attended a very interesting lecture on the Gadigals or Asker stones of Maharashtra. And that made me think of one sculpture in Hampi, which had puzzled me for all these years what it meant. It's not an Asker stone, but the theme is very similar. So I'm sure there'll be things that will fall in place, even later that I have still not understood, and that's the excitement of the site of Hampi. Now obviously in 40 minutes I can give you only a brief overview of this wonderful site, its art, archaeology, and so on. The Vijayanagara state was founded in the mid-14th century by two local princes. Their names were Hakka and Bukka. Hakka became Harihara the first. They were sons of a local chieftain called Sangama. The earlier Hindu kingdoms of South India and the Deccan had been swept away by the invasions of the Delhi sultans into this region. But fortunately for this region, the rule of the Delhi sultans lasted very briefly. Successful revolts resulted in the emergence of the Vijayanagara kingdom in the lower Deccan in 1336 and the Bahmani Sultanate in the upper Deccan in 1347. The Vijayanagara state established a new political order based on traditional Hindu cultural values. It was a powerful military state whose rulers for more than 200 years fought to attain supremacy over peninsular India by warring against rival Muslim sultans and also all the neighboring Hindu kings. The Vijayanagara rulers fostered the development of intellectual pursuits and the arts such as music, dance, literature, architecture, sculpture, and painting. To be honest, what we call today South Indian painting there's a continuity between Vijayanagara and Nayaka right up till today. They were also great patrons of religion, and while fostering and patronizing different Hindu sects and religious cults, the kings also permitted and even patronized at times the practice of other religions, such as Jainism and Islam, in their capital and empire. The majority of them were extremely tolerant. The founders of the Vijayanagara Empire polity established their capital at Vijayanagara city, which is here on the southern bank of the river Thungabhadra, which is a tributary of the Krishna. Now please note that just across this territory was where the Bahmanis established themselves. So there The capital is on the edge of the territory just between Vijayanagara and the Bahmanis. As the capital of a large and powerful empire, Vijayanagara was built up by its rulers as a showpiece of imperial magnificence and the greatest of all medieval Hindu capitals. From Vijayanagara city, 3 dynasties ruled over a large empire: Sangama, 1336 to 1485, Saluva, 1485 to 1505, and Tuluva, 1505 to 1565. Besides the founders, the most capable Sangama rulers were Devaraya I, 1406 to 1422, and Devaraya II, 1424 to 1446. After the latter, the kingdom declined under weak rulers, and this resulted in the usurpation of the throne by a minister of the Saluva family. But this dynasty lasted very briefly. There was a second usurpation by a Tuluva minister, and he established the Tuluva dynasty. The most famous of the kings of Vijayanagara was Krishnadevaraya. I think everybody has heard of Krishnadevaraya. Well, things that he did and didn't do are attributed to him all over South India. Like in Maharashtra, well, everything you'd say Shivaji. Like that in South India. In Karnataka, they'll say Krishnadev. And Andhra, both claim him. So he ruled from 1505 to 1529. I can go on talking about him. He was a wonderful PR man and a great self-publicist, besides being a great ruler, of course. He excelled in all his military ventures as well as in the patronage of religion, art and culture. He was succeeded by his half-brother Achyutaraya, who ruled from 1529 to 1542. When Achyutaraya died, there was a past struggle, and finally Ramaraya, the son-in-law of Krishnadevaraya, came to power as the regent of a minor king, Sadashiv. Now Ramaraya unfortunately changed the policies of earlier rulers. In my opinion, religious also, because he became a fanatically Vaishnava and began to ignore the Shaivas. But that is one aspect. So fanaticism is not just against other religions, it's between sects also, within the same, what we call religion. But more importantly, from a political point of view, he interfered in the interstate rivalries of the 5 Deccan sultanates that had been formed on the disintegration of the Bahmani kingdom towards the end of the 15th and early 16th century. This was disastrous, though initially he was very successful. Because Krishnadevaraya had been very careful. Though he defeated Bahmani rulers, he returned their territory. He didn't try to conquer territory north of the Krishna and keep it. But Ramaraya tried to do so. Now, as a result, the Deccan sultans, who are fighting themselves, among themselves, decided to temporarily bury their differences and take joint action against Vijayanagara. And so, the combined armies of the Deccan sultans, either 5 sultans or 4 sultans, according to sources, attacked the Vijayanagara state and defeated Vijayanagara in a battle fought on the banks of the Krishna at a place locally generally called Talikota. This battle proved disastrous for Vijayanagara. Following that, Ramaraya was killed and one of his brothers, his other brother escaped, arrived in the capital city, picked up the treasures and the puppet king and fled from there. And so the city was left deserted. It was first looted by robber bands and then systematically plundered for 6 months by the victorious Deccan armies. But all the destruction was not done at that time. Later treasure seekers and vandals have added to the destruction wrought by the victorious armies in 1565, and the forces of nature have continued the work of devastation begun by man. Vandalization goes on even now. I mean, I've seen it in the last 30 years. The Vijayanagara state never fully recovered from the catastrophe of Talikota. The northern parts of his erstwhile territory came to be occupied by the sultans of Bijapur and Golconda, and Vijayanagara city ceased to be the imperial capital. The truncated empire lingered on further south under the Aravidu dynasty, but we are not too much concerned about them right now. But the capital shifted from Vijayanagara first to Penagunda, then to Chandragiri, finally to Vellore. But under the Aravidus, gradually the feudatories, the governors called the Nayaks, asserted their independence, in Tamil Nadu, in Madurai, Tanjavur, Jinji, Vellore, and in Karnataka, Ikkeri, Keladi, Bangalore, Mysore. These are all successor states of Vijayanagara. From 1565 to 1800, the area where Vijayanagar city had once been passed through various hands. The hold of the sultans was short-lived. Later, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb conquered this area. Still later, it was dominated by the Marathas, and after that by Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan of Mysore. Now, as you know, the Tipu put up a very strong fight against the the English East India Company, and there were 4 Anglo-Mysore wars. Now, in the third and fourth Anglo-Mysore wars, this territory was captured, and it fell into the hands of the Nizam of Hyderabad, who had joined with the British against Mysore. The Nizam ceded it after the final defeat of Tipu and the adjoining area to the British in 1800. These ceded districts, they were called the ceded districts, were added to the Madras Presidency, of which it remained a part till Indian independence and the state's reorganization, when Bellary district was added to the state of Karnataka. Actually, it's on the borders. Both Andhra and Karnataka claim this area. The present-day Hampi, the erstwhile Vijayanagar city, is situated in Bellary district of Karnataka. The ruins of the city are situated amidst very impressive surroundings. I think what makes the site so interesting are not just the monuments. People go for different things. Some go to see birds, and some go to climb boulders, and others, well, to enjoy themselves across the river where there are, I think, drugs and all sorts of things are happening. So there are different possibilities. There were drugs when I first went there, a lot of hippies, and I have seen that around the place also. One of the most striking features is the river Thungabhadra that flows here in a northeasterly direction through a rugged, rocky terrain. To the south of the river are 2 ridges separated by a valley and then low hills. Immediately south of these, the landscape changes to open valleys with isolated rocky outcrops. What is fantastic about the site are those rocks and boulders. You almost think some giant was playing over there, and they just scattered them. And you think that some of those land on your head at any minute. They've stood there for centuries. You do not need to fear. Gradually, the hills disappear and the land becomes increasingly flat and open. The larger valleys are irrigated. It's the contrast between the stark rocks and the green fertile valleys that adds to the picturesqueness of the site. To facilitate documentation and for convenient differentiation between zones in this vast site, the core area, this is only the core area, please, can be divided, or for convenience, into 4 functional zones. Here you have the sacred center, where you have the maximum cluster of religious structures south of the Thungabhadra. Then there is an irrigated space here. Further south, enclosed by this wall, is the center which had the largest urban population. So it's been, you can call it an urban core. And at the southwestern end of the urban core is the royal center. But this area, which extends from Anegundi in the north to Kamalapuram in the south, is an area of 26 square kilometers, or 26 square kilometers. However, the wider metropolitan zone and the outlying villages extend much, much further, to about 300 square kilometers, and extend from Gangavati in the north right up to Hospet in the south. The core area is just here. You can see Anegundi, and you can see Hampi village, and you can see Kamalapuram. This is the core area. So you can imagine the size of the site. Now, we move on to architecture and art. Even the most cursory accounts of the architecture and art of the Vijayanagara Nayaka period, which is 1350 to 1700, comment on the increased scale of building activity and the fair degree of unity of architectural as well as sculptural expression over a large area covering much of southern India and a time span from the 14th century to the early 18th. Almost every temple of any importance in South India was enlarged in the 16th and 17th centuries. So what we see in these great temple towns, much of those enlargements took place in the 17th century or 16th century. Many of these additions were financed by the kings or those in his service, or by the later Nayakas. South Indian temples of the Vijayanagara era were built in a more or less uniform style. Now this is the first time all over much of South India there's a more or less uniform style. Otherwise the styles as we find in Tamil Nadu are very distinct from the styles that we found contemporary in Karnataka. Except in peripheral areas such as the Kannada coast, where strong regional variations are evident. This trend continued to a large extent under the Nayakas, with some variations. One could argue that the addition of almost identical building elements with similar sculptural repertoire, the same themes repeat and repeat and repeat, was one means by which the king or the state and the ruling elite could appropriate earlier sanctuaries and their religious cults. These kings had no legitimacy, they were all upstarts. So they had to claim legitimacy, of course, by different ways, and religion was a very, very good way of claiming legitimacy. The impressive scale of pillared halls and gopuras, the latter soaring to ever-increasing heights, proclaimed the power, the resources of the state. This overview of Vijayanagara art and architecture focuses on the capital city. If I have to tell you everything about the empire, I would never stop. And major developments in its architecture, sculpture and painting, and we're only going to touch on a few monuments. Because the developments elsewhere in the empire was largely influenced by the artistic processes set in motion in the capital city with regional variations. Moving to architecture, the extant monuments of Hampi consist mainly of religious, or you can go back, because I'm talking still about that, courtly and military buildings. The primary building material used in all standing structures is granite, which was locally available, found abundantly on the surface in the form of rocks and boulders. They just had to cut rocks, just slice it off. You'd see that some of them have been actually sliced and just begin building. The granite blocks used in temple architecture and for outer facings of walls and gateways were usually polished, while rougher varieties were used for courtly monuments that were very heavily plastered over. The superstructures of temples and gopuras of the mature Vijayanagara style was made of brick and plaster. Courtly buildings and dome structures were built of stone rubble in mortar. Fine plaster and stucco decoration embellished the brick and mortar work and sometimes even stone surfaces. Of course, only the stone structures have survived. All those made of perishable material, especially wood, have disintegrated. Since all residential structures, including palaces, were built largely of perishable materials, none have survived intact. So I'm including palaces. So of palaces or elite structures, or where they lived, only stone basements, rubble walls, and some brickwork are found. Evidently, the rest was of wood and other non-durable material. Now, coming to religious architecture, as far as religious architecture is concerned, there are Hindu and Jain temples and Muslim mosques, tombs, and gravestones at the site of Hampi. Mine? No. There are around, I forgot to put it on silent, so please excuse if it rings, but it doesn't normally ring. There are around, because I hate using the mobile phone, there are around 350 shrines and temples. Now you'll say, how do you know there are so many? Because I've actually gone physically. In those days, I was much more agile than I am now, obviously. If I could scramble around this 26 square kilometers, on foot please, not by the luxury of cars as I use today, because now I am not able to scramble around the same way. And I can say literally we walked from the camp because there was no other way of getting around. There was one vehicle that the Vijayanagara Research Project had, but you had to be lucky to get a lift in it. So I thought nothing of it, walking all the way from the camp, which is the Royal Centre, all the way to the Virupaksha Temple and back, all the way to the Vithala Temple and back, all the way up Malyavanta Hill and back. Now I say, how did I do it? But in those days, I didn't think anything of it. and all wearing sari and chappals, by the way. And getting caught in brambles and thorns and all the rest of it. So there are about 350 Hindu shrines and temples still traceable in the core area of the former city. The majority are small shrines, you won't even know they are shrines. Some are medium sized, few are large temple complexes. Now what does a large or medium sized or large temple plan look like? A medium sized temple has a garbhagriha, that's a sanctuary, an antechamber called the Sukhanasi, and usually a second antechamber called the Antarala, and then an enclosed hall with entrances on four sides are called the Rangamandap. Now larger temples have in addition around the sanctuary and antechambers an enclosed pradakshina, and then it has an open pillared hall in front. But then there are many ancillary structures. There's usually the consort shrine, the goddess shrine, to one side of the main shrine. Then there are the courtyards, prakaras, one or more. In Vijayanagara city, there are no temples with more than two, but in the Nayaka periods, there are many more. Sometimes their entry is through gopuras. And then there are others like the Kalyana Mandap, which is a platform where the deities were brought for the annual celebration of their marriage, which was enacted or commemorated every year. There are large 100-pillared halls for performances, or more likely also for recitation of sacred texts. And usually in the front, the large temples have a chariot street, and to one side a large temple tank. While the bulk of the Hindu temples at Hampi belong to the Vijayanagara period, a small proportion may be assigned to pre-Vijayanagara times. Now when we look at the temples at Hampi, there are two distinct styles or influences. The first is the local Deccan style. This is the style that existed prior to the setting up of Vijayanagara. The local Deccan temples are small, either single shrine, double shrine, triple shrine. This is the most elaborate of it. They are characterized by stepped pyramidal stone superstructures and fairly simple exterior walls. But soon Vijayanagara conquered and then Tamil Nadu and borrowed the Tamil style of architecture, which had been developed by the Pallavas and more importantly the Cholas. They wanted to be the successors of the great imperial Cholas. So they probably brought Tamil artisans, and we do have one or two monuments where you see Tamil script inscriptions, or their own artisans learned this style pretty soon. Because the Tamil style temples were more elaborate and they also had more components which fitted in with the increasingly elaborate ritualistic needs better than did the Deccan style temples. The Tamil style temples of Vijayanagara period, the superstructures are of brick and mortar. I say this because in the Pallava Chola temples they are of stone, but here they are of brick and mortar. That's a change Vijayanagara introduced. The wall surfaces are more decorative than those of the Deccan style, and the gateways are of the Gopura style. This is a clear Tamil borrowing. Karnataka or this part, the Deccan, did not have Gopuras, but today we think of it as something all over South India, and it is. And today they are building Gopuras even in places like the coastal Karnataka where they didn't have Gopuras. The Vijayanagara pillars. Now, Vijayanagara sort of created something which continues till today, but today they might do it out of concrete, but the pillars in temples of the south, even if they're building it in Houston, a South Indian temple, it has pillars like this, or anywhere in the world. This is a style which again they borrowed from one of the many styles of the Cholas, but they made it their own. It is one monolith, each pillar, a molded base, 3 cubical blocks, usually with reliefs on the 4 sides, so there are so many sculptures, are separated by octagonal or 16-sided blocks. And the brackets, because basically the pillar holds up the ceiling, and for that you need these brackets or the corbels. They are of the Pushpa Podigai variety. This is the curved bracket ending in this bud-shaped projection. Now this is the typical Vijayanagara pillar. But in the 16th century we have variations to that. we have the composite pillar. Now, these simple pillars, you need to have the pillars at very close quarters. Now, if you want to have areas which are open, more open, you need much more solid blocks. Now, very ugly to put solid blocks to hold up bigger beams for wider open spaces. So they cut it into what they call the composite pillar, where around the block you cut the little colonnettes, or you had these yalis, or yalis, these monsters prancing out, or later you have clusters of colonnettes, or you have figure sculptures of deities and or horses, prancing horses, and under the Nayakas, huge figure sculptures of either deities or donors. Now, this is a Yali pillar, one of the earliest. In my opinion, it was invented by Krishnadevaraya's architects in this particular hall. Then you have the horse type pillar. In Hampi itself, only 2 places, but in Tamil Nadu, Nayaka period, you'll find many of these. And this is in the Vittala temple, combination of clusters of colonnettes and yalis and figure sculptures like this. But figure sculptures are fairly small. But in the Nayaka period, look at this. You have these huge columns with the whole family portraits. This is the Pudumandap in Madurai, built by the great king Tirumala Nayak, the greatest of the Madurai Nayaks. And Pudumandap, by the way, they don't let you in because they lock it up. You can go around the periphery where you have shops. It's full of shops. I don't know when a fire is going to break out. Well, Madurai Meenakshi Temple, you know the Vasantaraya Mandapa had fire. There was a fire just couple of weeks ago. This Pudu Mandapa is inviting it because all around the periphery, inside, the outer prakara, this is the central part. Huge open space in the central part. The outer part, there are beautiful sculptures and pillars and so on. They have shops, tailor shops, and you can buy just about anything you want over there by going around over there, and jam-packed. And then in the center, they have exhibitions. All these temporary stalls are put up. So if you want to take photographs, they never give you permission. But once I managed to sneak in when there was an exhibition and went around behind. But this is a photograph taken by somebody and very kindly gave it to me. This is the portraits of the 10 Nayakas with their queens, clearly identifiable. So these are pillars, but these are fantastic works of sculpture. Okay. Now we move on to some of the major temples at Hampi. Among the major temples, I'm only going to discuss about 3 or 4. The most important, ritualistically, and even today it's the most important, is the one to god Virupaksha, a form of Shiva, who was adopted as the patron deity of the city and the empire by the Vijayanagara kings. Portions of this temple probably date to the period prior to the foundation of the capital city. I have concluded that Virupaksha temple existed at least from the 12th century, not like this of course. But numerous additions were made by Vijayanagara rulers and their others during that time. Now this is a distant view. You can see that from the Great Chariot Street to the Great Gopura. And this you can see the Chariot Street, and right down there is the temple, and this is Hampi village. The temple consists of 2 courtyards. One to the west, and this is the west, the inner one, and to the east. The entrance to the east is this great Gopura, which by the way is not an original Vijayanagara one. It has been reconstructed. It couldn't have been such a big Gopura originally. Then there's an inner small Gopura and a northern Gopura. And the northern Gopura superstructures of the 19th century, early 19th century. And then inside is the shrine of god Virupaksha. Now here you see the inner and outer east Gopuras. By the way, this is a dated Gopura, 1509, built by Krishnadevaraya on the occasion of his coronation. How do you know it? Krishnadevaraya didn't believe in anonymous donations. He wanted the whole world to know it. And so there are 2 inscriptions. In case you missed one, as you enter, you have one. And then in front of the main hall that he added, this beautiful Maharanga Mandap, there's the other. Here is the second inscription. If you go to Tirupati, Tirumalai Tirupati, by the way, the Venkateshwara or Tiruvengalanatha of Tirupati was the patron deity, was the favorite deity, Ishta Devata of Krishna Devaraya and subsequent all the rulers. And he visited it 7 times and gave all fabulous gifts to it. He made sure his inscriptions are there so that you know about his gifts and visits and so on, and what he did, his queen did, and his other courtiers did. But it is in the 3 languages of the empire, Kannada, Telugu and Tamil. So, well, everybody had to know that Krishna Devaraya has given all these things. Well, this is, now we move on to the next very important temple, the Ramachandra Temple. Besides being the center of Virupaksha worship, it was originally a Shaivite temple, site. The site from pre-Vijayanagara times was also associated with the Ramayana, for the area to the north of the Thungabhadra is believed to be the Kishkinda of the Ramayana story. Now the connection with Kishkinda and all that Ram did here, I'm not going into it, that's another whole lecture. The earliest temple to Ram dedicated at Hampi is the Hazara Rama or the Ramachandra Temple. It was probably more like a private royal chapel of the king because it's in the heart of the royal center. It was constructed in the 15th century with 16th century addition. It's the first major monument in the Tamil style of temple architecture, and it's a beautiful gem of architecture. Now, why is it called Hazara Rama? Because the entire Ramayana is carved here twice. Not just the 6 khandas of the Ramayana, but the Uttara Khanda, there is one also. But the 6 main khandas of the Ramayana are carved twice. First, you find them on the walls of the Rangamandap. You have to go around in Pradakshina 3 times. And you can see from Putra Kameshti Yajna to the coronation of Ram, Pattabhishek of Ram. And then you have it on the enclosure wall. And here it starts even before. It starts with the story of why Dashrath was cursed, the story of Shravan Kumar. And it ends with Ram merging in the divine form of Vishnu. But unfortunately in Vijayanagara period, they built a mandap against it, and so part of the Ramayana has got partially covered. Now, this is on the exterior wall, the inner face. On the outer face, you have the scenes of royal pageantry, which I show here. Now, so the god inside and the king outside, the parallel between the king and the god. Another great temple was this Krishna temple, built by Krishna Devaraya. He brought this back, possibly this murti, which was found when they excavated inside by the British, cleared it in the early 20th century. It was in the Garbhagriha. He brought back a statue of the Lord Krishna from the Udaygiri hill fort, which he captured from the king of Orissa in 1515. And then he built this temple. It's like a war memorial praising his great victory, that he has built a temple to the god after whom he is named, a suburb named Krishnapura. Now here you see a long distance view. This is the main Gopura, the top has collapsed. But on the inner face of this Gopura, you have these stucco friezes, rather unusual, which is really of a military parade. Probably some scene of the Udaygiri, military campaign or something like that. These are soldiers, okay, on a temple Gopura. But I'm sorry, this pink stuff is what the ASI tried to do conservation. They done mucked it around. That's not original. And in the process, the stucco work has got a little mucked up. Okay, now this is the main shrine to God Krishna. And again here there are 2 major inscriptions of Krishna Devaraya, which you just can't miss. Okay, now another interesting temple is the Tiruvengalanatha, or popularly called the Achyutaraya temple. This is an aerial view from the highest point, the Matanga hill. And you can see the full plan of this temple. It's in 2 enclosures, the inner enclosure, the outer enclosure, and then you have the Gopuras. You have this 100-pillared hall here. I've just written a paper on some sculptures on that. The great chariot street going along, there's a temple tank there and so on. But the most famous temple of all is the Vithala temple. And I'm sure this is the one that people know the most. It's the most ornate temple in the city. When was it built? Who built it? We don't know. Probably it dates from the late 15th or early 16th century. There's no foundational inscription. The earliest inscription is of 1513 of the donations of the queens of Krishna Devaraya of 2 Gopuras. And additions went on till almost the destruction of the city. The courtyard is large, 500 feet by 310 feet. Entrance is through three gopuras. Temple is dedicated to Vishnu as Vithala. Vithala, we think of the god in Maharashtra, Pandharpur, but Vithala is also popular in Karnataka. And inside we have, this is the main courtyard, and you see the main shrine and other ancillary structures. The main shrine consists of the Mahamandap, you have the Rangamandap and the Vimana, which is the Garbhagriha and the antechambers and so on, and other structures within, like this. This is the main Mahamandap, which has those fabulous musical pillars. I mean, they're not, I don't think they were meant to be musical, but today that's what people go there, either to see the stone chariot or to hear the sounds of different instruments. At least the tourist guides will tell you so. But I don't think that's what is interesting. I mean, for me, it's just the architecture. By the way, this hall was built as late as 1556, just 9 years before the destruction of the city. Then we have the Kalyana Mandap, again a very lovely hall. A 100-pillared hall added by Krishnadevaraya during part of this great Orisen war, and the stone chariot, which is really a shrine to Garuda. It faces the main temple to Vithala. Besides Hindu temples, we have the remains of at least 6 Jain temples over here. They are all fairly small, relatively plain, and invariably in the Deccan style of architecture. This is one of the earliest dated temples at the site, built by a minister of the third king, Harihara II. This is a temple to Parashwanath, built by King Devaraya II. Devaraya was a Shaiva, probably a Veerashaiva or Lingayat, but he was very wise in bringing the Muslim for his military, and obviously the Jains were great traders. And we know of the presence of a sizable Islamic population and of the Jain population over here. Besides that, we also have the remains of Muslim gravestones, whole cemeteries, tombs like this one over here, and of 2 mosques. This one is dated 1439, built by the flag bearer of Devaraya II. He does not call it a mosque, he calls it a dharmashala, a place of religion, and he says it was built by him for the merit of his sovereign. So obviously sovereign gave him plenty of freedom to do what he wanted to build. The mosques don't look like what we traditionally associate with mosques, but there's the mihrab niche inside. But the tombs look like a traditional Islamic tomb. Now we move on to civic and courtly and military architecture. Contemporary with religious monuments, we have buildings of secular monuments. Among these are some that employ features of Islamic architecture, such as arches, domes, and stucco decoration. Now these names have been given randomly by the British early antiquarians. So this is the elephant stables. Probably did serve for the royal elephants. But this is a beautiful pavilion which is called Lotus Mahal for reasons best known to them, because it's not any original name of it. Look at the stucco decorations in the Lotus Mahal. These cast arches, very, very Islamic, and the stucco. But then you see motifs like this, birds, the jali and so on, which you don't generally find in Islamic structures. This is the so-called Queen's Bath. Exterior, you see interior, this lovely balcony with stucco work, overlooking the pool itself. Then other structures, like this watchtowers, there are gateways, pavilions. But when you really look at this closely, it's not neither fully Islamic nor Hindu. It's really a mixed style, because this superstructure is like of Hindu temples. The basements and chajjas are as of temples. So it's really an amalgam. It's a sort of a mixed style. Vijayanagara borrowed quite heavily not only from Tamil Nadu but from neighboring Muslim kings and kingdoms also. Now coming to palaces and residential structures, nothing has survived. But excavations during the last 35 years have exposed certain basements, which we say were residential structures. These follow a set pattern, 3 recessed platforms, one set over the other, and with rooms on top. A number of these have survived, and there are also the remains of some large platforms like that of the King's Audience Hall and this huge platform called the Mahanavami platform or the Great Platform. What was it actually used for? Was it for the king to sit on top under a great canopy and watch the Mahanavami processions, or was that is the Dasara, or was it for the coronation? Nobody really knows. There are different views about it. Now, the city was surrounded by strong walls. According to some, 7 lines of fortification, one within the other. We have traces of at least 3, and the one around the urban core is intact. Now, set in the walls are these great gateways. Now, this is one gateway. There's the outer gate and the inner gate with this huge space inside. In the space, there will be bastions, shrines, etc. Plenty of space for an army or large amount of soldiers to be stationed inside. Vijayanagara city could not be conquered. It was attacked many times. It never fell till the king and the court fled from here, leaving the city to its fate. Now, water work. The city depended upon a regular supply of water, mostly provided by the monsoons. Great and small tanks created by earthen dam walls trapped rainwater, and canals conducted water from these across the Vijayanagara site. Small dams diverted water from the Thungabhadra into channels that irrigated fields. Some of these still exist. The hydraulic scheme that irrigates the valley today uses portions of the original Vijayanagara irrigational system. Remains of a complete hydraulic system are also preserved in the royal centre in the form of channels, drains, aqueducts, tanks and wells. When I first went there, this was standing. But what was not standing was this tank, that aqueduct fed this tank, but this was excavated in 1985. Now, with this we move on from architecture to sculpture and paint. These are some of the monuments I have mentioned. The great Virupaksha temple is here. This is the Ramachandra temple is here. This is the Krishna temple. Krishna temple is this. This is the Achyutaraya temple. This is the Vithala temple. The Jain temple of 1385. This is the other Parashvanatha Jain temple is here. This is that mosque I talked about. The elephant stables, the lotus mahal, and the Mahanavami platform is over here, and so on. Now, sculpture and painting. A vast quantity of sculpture was produced at Vijayanagara city and elsewhere in the empire, and substantial amount is still extant. However, except for individual pieces, the majority are not of high quality. By the way, after seeing great Chola works and Pallava works, you might say, what's so interesting about Vijayanagara? But what is interesting is the variety and the exuberance and the fact that it's very different from Chola and Pallava and so on, and it grows on you. Much of it is rather crude, and most of it is done on granite. Now look at this Sati stone, and Sati cum Hero stone, pretty crudely carved. There are some of very good quality, but the majority are fairly average. Now, part of this is because of the texture of the stone, which is prone to flaking. Another reason is the large amount of sculptural output being produced in a relatively brief span of time. But then it didn't really matter, because all these sculptures were originally covered with a thin layer of plaster and were then painted. So all the finer details could have been worked out in that. So we have to understand that we are not seeing the sculptures as they originally looked. Some of the, so you can see now this is in a structure, but how originally they were plaster and work done on the plaster, which may not have been there on the actual stone. Now then they were painted. This is of course modern paint, but you can imagine that earlier also sculptures were painted. This is a Devi who's become very popular. It's an original sculpture, but now she has gained in popularity, so she gets a new colored paint every year, and local villagers come around and all the rest of it. Yes. But you also have some minute sculptures on a stone that is not local, called schist. And on schist or chloritic schist, you can carve much more fine work. And the Hoysala, later Chalukyan monuments, they are made of schist, and that's why the very elaborate carvings. We also have stucco work on the superstructures of shrines, the stories of the gopuras, and surfaces of arches and ceiling. And much of the stucco work has disappeared, but what survives shows that there was very fine stucco work. Now there is an astonishing variety in scale in Vijayanagara sculpture, besides an astonishing variety of themes. There are large sculptures like this great Narasimha monolith, which is 6.7 meters height, and that contrasts with minute sculptures like this one. Sculptures are found at Hampi both in natural settings and in architectural settings. Natural settings, the sculptures on boulders and monoliths. And stone slabs. Taking advantage of the numerous boulders that dot the terrain, the sculptors kept carving all over the place. Sacred images and non-sacred images. Some of them are in highly inaccessible locations. The last time I went there, I had a student of mine, very athletic. She went clambering up. I didn't see that she had gone up there. When I saw what she was doing, I really had my heart in my stomach, because I was so worried, because it was so risky what she had clambered up to. But obviously people went there to carve. Some of these were later encased in shrines. Now this is a wonderful Hanuman in a yantra. It's called the Yantrodharak Anjaneya. And then a shrine was built around it. Today it is worshipped. This obsession with carving images on boulders extended to monolith sculptures, and sometimes even shrines were built around it. Then we also have sculpted slabs, some set in the open like this. This is some sort of a donation slab. And then we have these sort of slabs of the Naga stones. You'll find it all over the site and all over South India and maybe other parts of India. These were set up by people praying for children. There was a whole ritual done, and that continues even today, because I was going around doing my documentation in the 80s, and then I came across one in the Rama Temple, and I looked around and I suddenly saw G as Rama Prasad in Roman script. So obviously G as Rama Prasad was not a Vijayanagar period gentleman. So I asked, this was he had got it done in Roman script. So I heard that somebody had put that stone just very recently when he and his wife had no children, and so they prayed, and when they got a child, they had this Nagakal set up over there. Then we have these wonderful Sati stones. Sati was prevalent in the city, though perhaps not as widespread as what the foreign visitors make it out to be. But the Sati is represented by the raised right hand in either human form or in the form of a pillar. We also have the hero stone, so sometimes Sati come hero stone. So the husband died fighting heroically, and he is going up to heaven, and along with the wife has become a Sati, and then they reach heaven, mostly the heaven of Shiva. There are very few Vaishnava memorial stones. I found just two. I used to say there was only one. My research student pointed it out that there's a second one that has now been picked up from somewhere and put in the site museum. Yes. Now they're also in architectural settings. We have balustrades, pillars, surfaces of the walls, ceilings, and above all pillar reliefs. Vijayanagara sculpture is full of vigor and expression. Imagination of the artist was unrivaled. New icons were created. Actually, they didn't follow the traditional iconography. If you try to look for the great themes you find in South Indian art before that, you will not find them. If you look for Lingodbhava, you won't find Lingodbhava. If you look for these other great forms, if you say Tripurantaka, you won't find them. While if you go to a Chola temple, you have to have certain set images on the southern side, northern side, western side. Not so Vijayanagar, you can put any, they were very creative. So new icons were created, themes of everyday life came to be depicted, such as courtly and hunting scenes. This is a royal hunter, it's on the Mahanami platform. Horse traders, both Arab and Portuguese, soldiers, clowns, acrobats, there are many of acrobats, wrestlers or boxers. Here's a royal figure seeing these two gentlemen either boxing or wrestling or whatever they're doing. Dancers, both foreign dancers, these Turkish dancers. wonderful dance form, and wearing the typical costume and those shoes and so on. And classical dance, folk dances, the musicians, ascetics of all types, lots of yogis and so on. Animals, birds, and so on and so forth. So this is what makes Vijayanagara sculpture really so exciting. Besides stone sculptures, there were metal sculptures also. And among them, most of them now are, there were temple, icons, Utsav Murtis, but I think these are the most famous. There's metal images of Krishna Devaraya and his two queens, which are at Tirumalai temple. They don't let you photograph it, by the way. I don't see what makes them so worried that if you photograph the king and his queens who are only looking towards the main shrine, it's in the Gopura, you still find them. They drape them up like this. So if you want to see what Krishna Devaraya really looked like, this is what he really looked like, because it's a portrait sculpture set up by him and the names are inscribed on it. Yeah. Now coming to painting. The temples and palaces of this period were once all decorated with vividly colored paintings. They were executed directly on the plastered walls and pillars and ceilings as part of the permanent decor, or on large cotton cloths which were displayed on temporarily. Unfortunately, due to the fragile nature of plaster and cloth, nothing, almost nothing, very little of the Vijayanagara period painting survives. Of the Nayaka period, there are surviving examples, which again are fast disappearing. A colleague of mine, Dr. Anila Verghese, is trying to document all the surviving Vijayanagara and Nayaka paintings. Sometimes they don't let you do it, but at least to get digital photographs and then to keep it for future, because they are going to go. Here and there, we still find faint traces of paint at Vijayanagara. Now, if you go to Hampi, you will find on the ceiling of the Maharanga Mandapa of the Virupaksha temple a full painted ceiling. And generally, it was believed that this was of the Vijayanagara period. But closer study, and these are studies, one by Ilay Cooper and other by Anila Verghese. She has done it on style, and Ilay Cooper on costumes and on weapons. And it says these cannot be, they are either late 18th or early 19th century. Now watch this group, look at this group of soldiers marching towards each other. They are not wearing Vijayanagara period costumes, they are wearing culottes. This is of the period of the East India Company. And their turbans are the typical Maratha turbans. We also have some soldiers wearing type of jacket of Tipu Sultan with those spots on it. And they are holding bayonets. Bayonets, it's a dated weapon. So they are not of the Vijayanagara period. So where do we find Vijayanagara painting? Well, the best examples are at a place called Lepakshi. That's in Andhra. You can go to Lepakshi from Bangalore, and it has the most wonderful surviving murals. And we have been there many times, and these are photographs taken by myself and friends, and they are really of exquisite quality. So this is what Vijayanagara painting looked like. The Nayaka painting is slightly different. Now, thus the artistic movement at Vijayanagara had a vital regenerating power, creating a new aesthetic which determined the direction of subsequent artistic activity in southern India. The innovations that occurred in architecture, sculpture and painting influenced artistic development over a vast area under Vijayanagara and its successor states. Vijayanagara period monuments are found all over the present states of Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu. The artistic movement set in motion during the Vijayanagara period reached its climax under the Nayakas, especially the Tamil Nadu Nayakas. And some of these great temples, and what we see, these are of the Nayaka additions to the Madurai temple. This is of the 17th century, these towering gopuras and 1,000-pillared halls, etc. The temple at Srirangam with its 7 courtyards and 21 gopuras. This wonderful these horse pillars, 9 feet high. And the palaces at Tanjavur and Madurai, etc. They give us a glimpse what it was. Now, actually, I had another small section, but I don't know if the time is running out. I can stop, because the other section was briefly on what happened to Hampi after that. Do I go on or stop? Because it,
Then we have 10 minutes question and
Yeah, so then I can stop here. Yes, I mean, depends on what the audience wants. Because I was going to talk about the opening up of Hampi from 1800 onwards. So are you wanting that or are you wanting to ask questions?
So we have...
I'll just run through it then very quickly. Okay. The first modern account of the site, the British did the opening up of the site, was by Colonel Colin Mackenzie, who was later Surveyor General of this, India, who visited the site in 1799-1800. There were no photographs at that time, but he had color drawings and the first site map and accounts and descriptions and so on. The earliest photographs were by Alexander Greenlaw in 1856. And the Greenlaw photographs, a whole set of them, actually the negatives were found about 35-40 years ago, and they were studied by George Michel because they came to the British Library. And then the earliest epigraphical works began in 1887 with the setting up of the Madras Epigraphical Society. The first book publication was by Robert Seville. Till then, Vijayanagara had been forgotten. So in 1900, he wrote A Forgotten Empire. It's still a very important book, which gives the first account of the Vijayanagara history and the capital city. Now, the earliest guidebook was by A.H. Longhurst in 1917. Now, actual archaeological work began under Lord Curzon, who reconstituted the Archaeological Survey and appointed John Marshall as Director General in 1902. At that time, they decided to spend what was a princely amount of 1 lakh per year for archaeological works of special importance, and in the southern India, maximum work was done at Hampi. It was at this time that the site was cleared of all its jungle and vegetation, and roads were constructed to various buildings, and it's also at this time that they named some of these structures. And Longhurst worked over there, and then he brought out this book, Hampi Ruins Described and Illustrated. Still of great interest. By the end of the 1920s, Hampi was no longer forgotten. From 1920 to 70, it was a lean period of Vijayanagara scholarship. During these years, the only work the Archaeological Survey did was to collect sculptures and lying around the place, because in 1950s, with the first 5-year plan, the Thungabhadra Dam was planned. And with that, a large part of the metropolitan area and even one of the suburbs went underwater. So prior to that, they collected up all that they could find sculptures lying on the surface, and then they dumped it, and now it's in the site museum, but they never recorded where they got these things from. So a whole history has gone. 1975 was a watershed in the year for Vijayanagara studies. At that time, archaeology came under the Ministry of Education, and the education minister was Professor Nurul Hassan, a noted historian and archaeologist. He said all the work is being done on ancient sites. We must also do work on medieval sites. And so he decided to concentrate on 3 medieval sites, Hampi, Fatehpur Sikri and Champaner. And in Hampi, so work began in 1975 with a concerted effort by the Archaeological Survey of India, the State Department of Archaeology, and by scholars of the Vijayanagara Research Project and the Vijayanagara Metropolitan Survey. I think a lot of work for opening up Hampi to the public, popularizing Hampi, was done by George Michel and his team. And then in 1986, Hampi was placed by UNESCO on its list of World Heritage Monuments. It's one of the early ones in India to be inscribed. But the opening up has been a mixed blessing, because with increased flow of tourists and, there have been a lot of mucking around in the site. And so much so that UNESCO in 1999 put Hampi on its list of endangered sites. This shook the authorities. This compelled the authorities to set up a management plan for the site. I'm so sorry to say management plan has not really worked. And they put the management plan under Minister of State Tourism. And by the way, who was the Minister of State Tourism soon after was the famous or the infamous Janardhan Reddy. So you can imagine, his interest was not in archaeology and conserving things. They did whole-scale mining in that entire area, which is really part of the wider metropolitan area. Anyway, finally, because of the begging and pleading and promising they'll behave themselves, in 2006, UNESCO took Hampi off the list of endangered sites. But for me, I've been going there from 83, and I say opening up is great. Lots of people are going there, but it's not no longer the Hampi that I knew. But there has been tremendous work in Hampi in the last 35, 40 odd years by internationals, and so this is excavations were carried out by the Archaeological Survey, the State Department of Archaeology, this entire area, which they call noblemen's quarters, for whatever reason, and conservation work, some was very highly criticized. That's what the Narasimha statue image looked like. It had its own majesty. 1985, Archaeological Survey decided to conserve it, and they decided they were going to restore it to what they thought it looked like. And there was one sculpture which you can see that relief, and they said it looked like that. It's a Lakshmi Narasimha. Actually, it is. This is the arm of Lakshmi actually coming here on the lap of Narasimha. And so they began with little bits they found here and there to put other bits that were new and to reconstruct the whole thing. So the feet are new, the Yoga Patta is new. There was an international hue and cry that this went beyond conservation to an entire restoration. And so then Archaeological Survey was forced to stop it. So now it's in a worse state than before, because they neither completed it nor can they go back to what it was, because they made holes to put all these legs in and so on. Legs and Yoga Patta and so on. They would have put the whole thing back, but I don't know whether that was very good. Well, here is the camp where we lived. I mean, that's one of the... First I lived in a tent, then I was very fortunate because the Karnataka State Department allowed us to use their camp. There was no place to stay. There was locally only the PWD guest house, which by the way was an original Narasimha temple of the Vijayanagara period. You can still see the pillars and so on. And one of the rooms is the original Garbhagriha. But then to get in there is very difficult. But this State Department set up a camp, and they allowed the international scholars, and they allowed me also to use their camp. And between 1983 and 85, when I began work, till 2001, I did use the camp, and otherwise I could not have managed. There was no public transport. I mean, there was a bus service from Hospet to Hampi, and you could get that if you were lucky from wherever you could get it, but it had fixed times, but mostly we walked. As I said, I was just telling my friend Deepa over here, who was interviewing me, there was not even a toilet in Hampi village. I know when the first toilet was built in 1987, because a scholar friend, Asim Krishnadas, Alan Shapiro, he went and lived in one of the houses in Hampi village, and he built a toilet for himself over there. Then the villagers said, long before Swachh Bharat, we better begin building some toilets. And so then they began doing all that. Actually, since then there's been tremendous interest. When I first went there, there was only the Robert Sewell book, A.H. Longhurst's book. There was a Hampi guide by Deva Kunjari of the Archaeological Survey of India out of print. And there was the first Marg volume. There was nothing else available. And now, because of the work of all these scholars and the Archaeological State Department, we have a lot of publications, and I'm very happy to have been part of this great project and venture. And it has been a wonderful site to work on. And there's not a single time I've gone, and I don't know how many times I've gone there, but I haven't seen something which I'd never noticed before. And I can say that absolutely honestly, that I've noticed something, either it was covered by vegetation or the light was not correct, or something clicked. I've really seen something new every time that I've been there. And I hope I will continue to see, but now it gets tiring clambering around all over there. I found my last visit, which was last year, rather tiring. Okay, physically, not emotionally. Emotionally, I was on high, but not physically. I was very, very low, unfortunately. That's what, as you grow a little older, that's what happens. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Dr. Anila Verghese, for such wonderful and deep insight. I'm sure everyone's ready with questions, so already hands up.
Yes.
We'll take 2 to 3 questions, just to save up on time.
I have 2 questions. One is before the slide before the bath, you showed the Vijayanagara gate and the stone corridors and then the gate. and the gate had a roof and it had a slab of rock. I wonder how they put the slab up, how many feet high, and how they put it up, and what was the sealing agent? They would
No
have
sealing
cement.
agent, no sealing agent.
So between the rocks, how did they?
Actually, it's all, see, we have to understand the traditional Hindu style of architecture, there's no sealing agent, there's only mud that held it together. First of all, the walls are very thick, and the exterior is of polished granite, the interior is all rubble packed with mud, and it just held, they interlocked the stones together. There is nothing, but not the courtly monuments which had arches and so on, they had the mortar work, but not the temples and not the gateways and so on. Yeah.
And the ceiling, the top slab of rock,
Yes.
how did they get it up? Any idea about
No,
that?
really no. The walls are around the urban core, they're pretty high, 6 meters high. So how do they get it up? I do not know. But then how do they get up on the Brihadishwara temple in 1000 AD, 80-ton stone that are 200 feet high? So that they really had wonderful works.
Any connection with the isolated Madurai temples?
No.
None whatever.
See, actually, Vijayanagar never borrowed from the Karnataka styles of either the later Chalukyas, early Chalukyas, etc. They took some bits and pieces of later Chalukyan structures. One scholar has said probably that step tank was a later Chalukyan tank from another site dismantled and brought here, but that by the later rulers. But they did not borrow, they borrowed from the Cholas. Very
Cholas,
interesting,
yes. I could
Very
see it from
interesting.
the layout.
Because they
of the
conquered Tamil Nadu, but Tamil culture conquered them. In rituals, in the great cults that they brought in, and Sri Vaishnavism from the deep south of Tamil Nadu, and also temple architecture. But they made it a pan-South Indian style of architecture. What had earlier been of the Chola heartland, they lifted it out, changed it, it's not identical. Like the Gopuras, for example, the superstructures of the Vimanas, of the shrines, are not of stone. The pillars are different. They created something new, but based on the Chola, and they do not follow the Chola iconography at all.
But the layout is exactly Chola. You know
Yes, but they don't have those images in the niches like the Chola.
I thought they were.
No. Only that temple, they are carved onto the wall surface. Chola, they were placed in the niches. You don't have, the niches are all empty. The niches are only decorative. So it is not identical with Chola. They adapted Chola. Like they adapted from the Deccan Sultan. I think it's time up. Yes.
One question.
Yeah.
The legend of the musical pillars, as well as could explain about also the legend that you could pass a paper under the base of a pillar.
Base of a pillar, I don't think so, excuse me. There are more fantastic pillars in other parts of South India. The musical pillars, it could be just the nature of that particular stone, and when they cut so many colonnades, 16 out of and it just happened. I don't think they went around designing it like that, though people tried to say and for me that's not important whether they were musical or not, they just look so beautiful. But this is something, I don't think they planned it like that. They were not sitting and playing on that while somebody danced or something. I doubt it. It wouldn't have enough of sound for that. You have to put your ear like that to get the sound. So not that you could be sitting in the hall and that you could play on each of these pillars. Sorry.
And thank you very much. And I'm sorry I stood up to ask a question.
No,
I'm always scared of teachers and doctorates.
Oh, don't worry at all. Don't worry at all of that. Thank you. Yes? Who? Because the city was sacked. See what happened, you have to understand it, that after the battle of Talikota, there was panic. Ramaraya fell, one of his brothers died, his third brother who survived fled. He was more interested in saving the treasures and himself and his family and the king, and they fled. They didn't put up a defense in the capital city. So they left it to its fate. And so the city was sacked. I don't think they deliberately burnt it, but in the sacking it got burnt also. So it is said that afterwards they tried to come back. The first of the Aravidu kings tried to come back, but it was not possible. Caesar Frederick or Caesar Frederici, who visited it a few years later said they tried to restore it, but they couldn't. There were people living there. There are still people living in Hampi, but it just declined after that. Pardon? Oh, that's what people say. It was, but that was, you have to remember, obviously they carried all the treasures and ran away, and what was not carried off was looted. So if you excavate, you're not going to find treasures, unfortunately, except when they have dug into those wells and so on. Once they did find one gold chain, probably it was trampled underground in the Melli, otherwise it was systematically looted. So they didn't find it, and later treasure seekers have continued digging under whatever they could dig in the hope of finding treasures even after that. So even if you excavate today, you hardly find anything. But if it's just